Hi, I'm John Moulis, and welcome to another one of my election talks for the 2013 federal election. Now, since I talked to you last time, we have seen a significant change to the political landscape in Canberra. Julia Gillard has been dumped as Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd is back. Now, it was a change that really had to happen with the Labor Party. I mean, even the most rusted on true believers realised by that point that they were gone, that Gillard was a loser, basically, that she was poison, electoral poison. I mean, and the opinion polls stated it week after week. I mean, Tony Abbott had opened up a 12-point lead in personal popularity over Gillard. I mean, when Gillard became Prime Minister, she had something like a 20% or 30% lead over Tony Abbott. And she left in ignominious circumstances, having firebombed her party's popularity, and the opinion polls were saying that it was 58 to 42 split, which would have been a record loss if Gillard had taken the Labor Party to an election. So something had to give. I mean, the backbenchers were getting restless. I mean, the heartland had left the Labor Party. I mean, you had seats like Blacksland in the western suburbs of Sydney, Paul Keating's old seat, which Paul Keating used to win by about 63% at some elections. Even the last election when Keating lost the election to John Howard and the Liberals, he got over 60% of the vote. That electorate was going to be lost to the Labor Party. The Liberals were going to win that election. Countless other elections, all of Queensland would have gone, and all of Western Australia, all of South Australia. So pragmatism ruled within the Labor Party. They had to swallow their intense hatred for Kevin Rudd and realise that in order to have a chance in the 2013 election, they had to bring back Kevin Rudd. Now, it's only a few days since Kevin Rudd became leader, and the opinion polls have confirmed what they were saying in the lead up to Gillard being axed. That bringing back Kevin Rudd has brought normalcy back to the party. It's brought back the traditional situation that we've loved in this country, of having proper leaders of parties, not token females, not ideological candidates. It's brought the normal situation back to Australia, and people love it. I mean, Kevin Rudd's has brought an immediate turnaround in the opinion polls, almost a turnaround in the opinion polls. That one poll says that if an election was held now, it would be a hung parliament. Another poll says that the Labor Party is 1 point or 2 points behind the Liberals in two-party preferred terms. So we now have a contest on our hands. Now, Kevin Rudd will have to put on his political thinking cap here, because honeymoon periods don't last long in Australia. Sometimes they last a very long time. When Bob Hawke became Prime Minister, he had a honeymoon period of almost 2 years, right up until the 1984 election, when he came crashing back to earth. Other honeymoon periods have lasted a very short time. It's normally the situation in Australia is that you get a bounce in the opinion polls, and that is like a sugar hit. It only lasts for a short time. Now, the challenge for Kevin Rudd is to hold an election during that honeymoon period. because you have to realise that we went through 3 years under Gillard where people had just savagely turned against her and the Labor Party. They had made up their minds that they were going to vote Liberal. Now, you can't get rid of that feeling overnight. You know, that the Labor Party might have bounced back in the opinion polls, but it will be very much like when Gough Whitlam was sacked by Sir John Kerr. There was a swing back to the Labor Party for a few days, and then after that, people swung back to the Liberals again. And the Liberals won by a landslide in 1975. Now, business leaders are screaming out for an election. They want an election, and they want it sooner rather than later to get the election out of the way so that they could have certainty. Because the situation now is untenable. We don't know the election date. We don't know whether, some commentators are saying that Kevin Rudd might delay the election to November or December. Other commentators are saying that we could have it on August the 3rd, August the 24th, or August the 31st. I really do think that if Kevin Rudd and Labor want to maximise their chances of winning, they have to have it sooner rather than later. August the 3rd is the earliest possible date that we can have an election, simply because of what I mentioned in my last video, the Senate. If you have it any earlier than that, then there will have to be a half-Senate election during the next government, say next year or something, and that will create a by-election effect where people will vote against the government because there's no chance of the government losing office. So the earliest possible date to keep the House of Reps and the Senate in synchronicity is August the 3rd. And I really do think that that should be the election date. Because the fact is, the opinion polls now are probably put Labor in the box seat, because the Labor Party are very good grassroots campaigners. They have turned around at least 2 election campaigns where the early opinion polls said that they were gone. The most obvious example was the 1993 election, federal election, with John Hewson as Liberal leader and Paul Keating as Prime Minister. Now, at the start of that election campaign, John Hewson was in front by 8 points, and he looked like a shoo-in to be the next Prime Minister. But during that election campaign, the Labor Party were able to campaign their door-knocking, public meetings, everything else, and advertising as well. They had possibly the best advertising campaign during an election campaign that we'd ever seen in Australia. Far better than the It's Time election campaign in 1972, because all of that was able to turn that around. And as we all know, on election day, when the election was held in 1993, Paul Keating scraped in. He said that was a result for the true believers. And also, the New South Wales state election of 2007. At the beginning of that election campaign, it said that the Liberals were going to win that election. Now, during that election campaign, the Labor Party campaigned hard. They knocked on doors, they pamphleteered and did everything, and they were able to turn that around, and Morris Yemmer won that election in New South Wales. I mean, mind you, the day after the election, everybody regretted voting Labor, and every opinion poll after that showed the Liberals in front and getting further in front. And when the election was held in 2011, the state election, the Labor Party lost by what was then a record majority. Of course, the Queensland election in 2012, that smashed that record again. The Labor Party were left with only 7 seats after that election. So I really do think that if there's an early election during the honeymoon period on August the 3rd, and if the Labor Party can get those campaigning skills back again, those grassroots campaigning skills, that they have a chance of winning the election. An outside chance, it is a very remote chance, but the fact is that this election isn't a lost cause for them. Now, there's another reason too why they might be in with a chance here. I mean, Gillard had that idiot, that mad Scotsman, John McTernan, Mr. 457 visa, advising her, and he was an absolute disaster. It was terrible. And with him out of the way, and with traditional Labor Party people back in there calling the shots, maybe Kevin Rudd will have a chance. And, raking over the coals of the Gillard government, I mean, what can you say? I mean, she firebombed the Labor Party, but I don't really believe that it was an absolute disaster. I think that was the prime ministership that we had to have in this country. Now, for years, people like me had been warning against putting a woman in as prime minister. We had warned that women don't lack the skills to be in such a high position, that they just don't have the mental makeup to handle such a high position, and it would be a disaster. And people, largely feminists and everything, poo-pooed our ideas. They called us dinosaurs, sexist, male chauvinist pigs and everything like that. And so they went and put in a woman prime minister, and it turned out exactly as I expected. A total disaster. I mean, I can't really think of one positive thing about Gillard as prime minister. Everything was a disaster. I mean, for years we'd been told by feminists and their sympathisers that, if we had a woman running things, there'd be no more wars, that there'd be no more divisiveness, no more conflict, no more bad feelings and everything else. But you only have to look at Gillard's term of office to realise just how way off beam that was. I mean, under Gillard's prime ministership, 7 Australian soldiers were killed in Afghanistan. We had the gender wars, and that's another thing that with Kevin Rudd in as prime minister, we can just forget about, because Gillard got in there and she made gender the big issue, and that was the overriding issue above everything else. She turned it into a major issue. So it was women against men. And when you have a situation where 50% of the population are men, and they vote, we vote, and to have men being totally alienated like that, to alienate half the potential voters, I mean, that's just crazy. I just can't understand that. When the minute she got up there with that Women for Gillard rally, with all of the sisterhood there wearing their t-shirts, giggling when she talked about men with blue ties, look, I just can't understand how that was ever allowed to happen. Surely someone in the Labor Party could have been there telling her not to do it, that this would be electoral suicide, that this would be a disaster. And then, on the last day of her prime ministership, that magazine spread that came out showing her knitting there, I mean, that was a disaster. I mean, that was echoes of Cheryl Curnow in the Women's Weekly with that red prostitute dress that she was wearing. I mean, it was just crazy, and the Women's Weekly knew that they were taking a risk putting her in there, because, apparently John McTernan arranged all of that, and he expected her to be on the cover and to be advertised as a really big thing. As it turned out, the Women's Weekly put Prince Harry on the cover, and all of the pointers on the cover about the articles inside, no mention of Gillard at all. I mean, it was well into the magazine. It was only a 2-page spread. I mean, McTurnan expected it to go for about 4 pages or 6 pages. And, you know, and it was a disaster. I mean, the reaction to that was just poisonous. And on that same day, I mean, the Labor Party finally realised that the game was up, that you couldn't have this. I mean, it really is for a party like the Labor Party to put Gillard in as Prime Minister was just crazy at all. I mean, it was the work of the AWU, Bill Shorten in particular, but the AWU and all of those people who had turned against Kevin Rudd in 2010, because, you know, let's not forget this. I mean, Kevin Rudd was knifed largely because of the opinion polls back then. That when was it? About 8 months earlier, Stephen Conroy had announced internet censorship. Everybody in cyberspace turned against him. That people were screaming for the government to be defeated, for internet censorship to be dumped, and there was the pink bats, the BER, the school halls, all of those disasters. But it seems that, you know, now 3 years later, it's a case of absence makes the heart grow fonder, that people have largely forgotten all of those disasters. I mean, they haven't forgotten the boat people disaster, the illegal asylum seekers, how Kevin Rudd changed a policy that worked, the Howard government's Pacific solution, and brought in this so-called more compassionate approach to refugees. I mean, but he had to do that because there were very strong and powerful people within the Labor Party who wanted that to happen. They formed a group called Labour for Refugees. They were calling John Howard a racist and a redneck, and they were denouncing the Pacific solution and all of that. And they succeeded in getting that Pacific solution, which had completely stopped the flow of boats. They got that reversed, and we all know what happened after that. Almost immediately, the people smugglers were back in business again. They were back taking tens of thousands of dollars, organising the boats, and we've been swamped with boats. You know, absolutely swamped with boats. I mean, the illegal asylum seekers are housed in houses in the western suburbs of Sydney largely. They do nothing all day. They get $200 a fortnight more than pensioners. They're not allowed to work. I mean, they amuse themselves by sexually assaulting females and vandalising things and everything like that. I mean, people criticise the western suburbs of Sydney and the heartland for having these attitudes towards boat people, but the fact is that the illegal asylum seekers are dumped in the western suburbs. You know, they're not in detention centres anymore, thanks to the Greens. They've been dumped in the western suburbs, dumped in suburban streets, and we all have to put up with it. You know, we didn't want it, the public didn't want it, but you've got very powerful people in the community pushing the cause of refugees and pushing the cause of asylum seekers. Anyway, this is about to run out now, so come back for another election video. But as I say, it's a whole new ball game now. Labor is now back in the hunt. They're back into the competition, and it's going to be a very interesting period ahead of us, where we're going to see a very interesting election campaign. And as I said before, let's hope the election date is sooner rather than later, so we can get this election out of the way, get a new government in place, and get stability back into the country, get normalcy back into the country with a normal Prime Minister, not a token. Okay, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.